I'm going to record. All right, there we go. We're recording, so we're good.
Okay.
And so for everyone else's knowledge, because I believe California is a multiple party consent state, although this is a public event, so I don't think it matters. We are recording this, and a version of this, perhaps slightly edited, will go onto YouTube so that people can reference the presentation in the future. And we'll just give folks another minute or so to get online.
Hello.
Okay, it is 6 o'clock, although I think that environmental circles, we often run just slightly late. So I'm going to delay starting, or I can just go through pleasantries and some kind of ground rules for tonight's talk. Or ground rules is way too formal of a thing to say. Just friendly reminders if you don't spend all day on Zoom like I do, on how to have kind of the most productive time here. So if you are not muted, please do so by going down to the bottom left corner of your screen and hitting the mute button. It should be a small microphone icon. If you don't want to have your video be showing, you can stop video by hitting the button to the right of that. And then your name will just appear as a black box, as Nicholas's does, for example. That way, you know, I think a lot of us often forget sometimes when we're on video calls that we are being seen by other people. So this, again, is going to be recorded. So don't do anything on video that you don't want to be memorialized.
Thomas, I
Yes.
can't see the main screen. How do I get to the main screen? I just see all of you, but no main screen.
You see all of me. You don't see behind me something that says Timber Harvest Plans in California.
No, I see launch meeting
Oh,
screen.
remains.
Um,
Hi, Thomas. I definitely see it.
Okay.
I see your Epic PowerPoint.
Thea, are you on the Zoom application, or are you on the website still that got you to this Zoom call?
I don't know. It says Zoom and then it says launch meeting. Which is that?
Well, try hitting launch meeting and that should bring up this again. If not, if you have the Zoom application on your computer, then you can go to your open applications tab and open up the application. Sometimes for folks who don't have Zoom downloaded, it might be a separate window within your web browser. So we're definitely coming through somehow. So I can see you and you can hear me. So something's working.
And I do have Zoom.
Okay.
I mean, I have downloaded it before.
Yeah.
Oh, we got Zoom US. There it is.
Well, I'm afraid I am not able to figure it out. But I hope that you're going to be able to see the video or to see the screen at some point. If not, again, this will be posted online, and I can also send around a PDF copy of this PowerPoint presentation. So hopefully, if I do my job well, just by listening, you should be able to pick up enough, and that what's on the screen won't be necessary.
All right. Thank you, Thomas.
Okay. So again, try to mute yourself and we'll begin now. All right. So we're going to talk about timber harvest plans in California, how to review, track, and write comments on timber harvest plans. My name is Tom Wheeler, and I am the executive director at the Environmental Protection Information Center, better known as EPIC. I am also an attorney. I went to the University of Washington School of Law, and a good portion of my job is reviewing, writing comments on timber harvest plans, So this is something that is within my wheelhouse. I am still trying to become an expert in this subject. So I hope that I will be able to answer any questions that you might have. If you have questions while we are going, my suggestion would be to do it in the chat function for tonight, and I will grab questions as I can. If not, we'll pause at the very end for a period of Q&A. All right, so you want to comment on a timber harvest plan. That's why we're all here tonight. Tonight, there's going to be 4 takeaways. What is a THP? We're going to talk about just the nuts and bolts of what is a THP. We're going to talk about how you can access or find a THP so that you can learn to comment on one. We're going to go through the contents of a THP, and we'll do some basics on commenting on a THP. And we're going to have another class next week where we're going to do a deeper dive into commenting, and we're going to get into the interrelations between the California Environmental Quality Act, the Endangered Species Acts, both the federal and state Endangered Species Act, the Porter Cologne Water Quality Control Act, which is our state law which implements the federal Clean Water Act. And we're also going to talk about reforming forestry laws. So what it will take to have forest practice rules that adequately protect endangered species, water quality, carbon sequestration, all those values that we depend on forests. All right, so what is a timber harvest plan? Fundamentally, it is a discretionary permit. So CAL FIRE has the ability to say yes or no to a timber harvest plan. It is also a functionally equivalent document to an environmental impact report for the purposes of CEQA. So the California Environmental Quality Act, I think a lot of us are familiar with that, requires that we take a look at the likely environmental impacts of any project in the state of California. So this is something that is functionally equivalent to an EIR. And a lot of the rules of CEQA get imposed on to the forest practice rules. So it's not formally within the forest practice rules, but you can kind of take what you want from CEQA sometimes and force CAL FIRE to do it. The rules and regulations of the Forest Practice Act are the Forest Practice rules are promulgated by the Board of Forestry. The Forest Practice Act is passed by the legislature. And CAL FIRE is the lead agency for the review and approval of THPs. There are other forms of logging as well. So THPs are not the only way to log. They were once the primary way to log. We're starting to see way more THP exempt logging or emergency notice logging. So some things that are exempt from having to file a timber harvest plan. If you're doing oak woodland restoration, that's a different process. Or salvage logging, better known, or perhaps it should be better known as post-fire logging. That again is something that can be done without a timber harvest plan. So depending on your circumstance, you may not have a THP that you can use to take on a logging project. There are multiple players in the THP process. First is the timberland owner. This is a person who owns the underlying land and the timber that they would like to be harvested. Then you have the RPF. The RPF is sometimes different than the timberland owner, sometimes works for the timberland owner. This is the person who fundamentally writes and the THP, the timber harvest plan. Next, you have the licensed timber operator. That's the person that's actually going to do the felling. They're the people who take the timber harvest plan and implement it. CAL FIRE is our lead agency. So this is the agency that will approve or disapprove THPs. And you also have other agencies, state agencies that will come in and play some sort of a reviewing role in the timber harvest plan process. So the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Geological Service, the regional water boards, the Native American Heritage Commission, counties can do this, although it is somewhat rare, and so on. And lastly, us, the general public. So we are an important part of the THP process, although I think that the general public has been treated pretty poorly by CAL FIRE in reviewing THPs. So as I said, CEQA gets imparted onto the Forest Practice Act and rules. The California Environmental Quality Act is one of the primary things that governs private forest logging in California. The Forest Practice Act is implemented by the Forest Practice Rules. So you can find the Forest Practice Rules at 14 California Code of Regulations, section 895, and so forth after that. I see some questions in the chat. Let me pull up the chat bar. So I'm going to answer some questions about functional equivalency and technical rule addendums later. And this presentation will be available on YouTube. And when it is, I will make sure that Perry or Karen sends out an email to folks who signed up for tonight's webinar so that you'll have a link to that. All right, other laws that apply. Again, this is going to be primarily the focus of next week's presentation, but we have the Federal Endangered Species Act, we have the State Endangered Species Act, we have our Federal Clean Water Act, which is implemented by the California Porter Cologne Act. Other things still come into play and regulate timber harvest practices. Let's talk about how THPs work. So first, you have the submission of a THP. Within 10 days, you're going to get a THP number. This is going to be the thing that you will use to track and comment on a THP throughout its life. So CAL FIRE will do a cursory first review at this time. So they'll make sure that everything is submitted correctly. And that's when it will be assigned its THP number. Next is a pre-harvest inspection. A pre-harvest inspection is kind of what it sounds like. It is an on-the-ground look at the area. So CAL FIRE and other state agencies are welcome to participate in that pre-harvest inspection. Unfortunately, one of the big flaws of the Forest Practice Act and rules is that the public is not necessarily invited. Sometimes if you were to ask if you ask the RPF on a project, they may let you on a PHI, but it is not required of them. So this is what your notice of filing is going to look like. It's going to have a lot of information. We'll talk about how you find documents like this. Among other things, it will give you a rough idea of when public comment may close. So here, the earliest close of public comment was going to be on 7/25/2020. The public comment period is an extremely confusing process, though. So that, as you can see, that was the earliest close of public comment. Almost always public comment will be open longer than that deadline that they give you in the official notice of filing. All right, so you'll have the pre-harvest inspection, and then after that, you'll have a second review meeting. So at the second review meeting, this is where all the agencies can come together and sit down and talk about the issues that they potentially have with a THP. And it also offers the RPF an opportunity to respond to comments by these state agencies. This is an example of what a comment letter from an agency might look like. So this is CGS, the California Geological Survey. All right. So after the second review meeting, the next kind of general deadline is 30 days after the PHI, the pre-harvest inspection. That's when the public comment period will close. And the RPF is going to respond to all comments that were submitted within the public comment period. And then it gets turned over to the agency for review. So let's talk about how to find a THP, because this is something we all need to know so that you can become good activists, so you can engage in THP review. All THPs are now on a website called Caltrees. So you're going to want to go to Caltrees. The link is at the bottom there. There's also a page later in the presentation that has all of these links. You're going to want to hit search plans. So actually, I should back up and say this is for finding an individual THP. So if your neighbor were to tell you, oh, you know, the timber company up the block from us is has filed a THP, and here's the THP number. This is how you'd go about finding that THP. And we'll talk about how to generally look for THPs in an area that you're concerned with soon. All right, so you're going to take that THP number, you're going to put it into the search category. So under document number, you'll put in your THP. So the various numbers here mean different things. So 1 means it's in the coast range. 20 is in reference to the year. So this is submitted in the year 2020. This is the 193rd THP that was submitted. And this THP that I'm looking for is in Mendocino County. Next, you're going to want to go over to the document type, and you're probably going to be looking for a THP. So go down to THP Timber Harvest Plans and click that. So then when you search, a page like this should pop up. This is your landing page for that individual THP. And most importantly is this section down here at the bottom, attachments. So attachments are going to have all of the primary documents for the Timber Harvest Plan. This is where you'll go to find the Timber Harvest Plan itself, as well as comments from agencies, response to comments from CAL FIRE, public comment. This has all the theoretical documents that are in a THP. Next, let's talk about if you're just generally interested in monitoring a particular area. Let's say that you live in a watershed that gets hammered pretty regularly, and you want to make sure that no THPs that are filed in that watershed escape your review. Or if you are really stepping up your game and you want to review all THPs that come in a particular county. These are all things that you can do, and CAL FIRE will alert you when new THPs are submitted, so you'll never miss a beat. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to sign up for an account on Caltrees. I don't think I will go through how to sign up for an account. It's pretty simple. Then you will enroll for notifications. So you're going to click this first button up here, subscribe to notifications. You're going to get a page like this. And then you can start to subscribe to different things. So you could subscribe to all THPs, all timber harvesting documents, so including things like emergency notices and exemptions and so forth. You can subscribe to an individual watershed. So if you want to go and monitor a particular area, one suggestion is that you can find your watershed identification number. So this is a pretty standard tool that's used across various state agencies. All watersheds have a watershed identification number. The way that I often go about finding them is I will go to the Watershed Mapper website, which is run by CAL FIRE, and it is an interactive map. And as you zoom into particular areas, you can see what watershed you're looking at, as well as previous THPs that have been filed for that area. So you can enter that watershed identification number, and then all THPs that are filed that reference that watershed number will be given to you. So next, you can sign up for different documents by counties. I'm subscribed to all documents from Humboldt County, Mendocino County, and Del Norte County. You can also subscribe to documents within an individual THP number. So if you want to maintain your review of a particular THP, but you're bad at, remembering to go to the Caltrees website and looking at it routinely, you can be notified by CAL FIRE when there are new documents available within that THP that you are reviewing. All right. Next, we'll talk about the contents of a THP. So this is the really important stuff here. So THPs are broken into 6 sections. And I have stars next to what I think are the 2 most important areas, section 2 and section 4. If you're really doing a thorough review, you'll probably end up using the first 5 sections. The 6th is probably something that you will not end up using. But sections 2 and section 4, really, these are the 2 areas that I go to see if I should be concerned about a particular THP. All right, so looking at section 2, some of the important areas. In item 14A, you can learn about what type of silviculture they're going to employ in this THP. So are they going to do clear cutting, for example, or are they going to do group selection or single tree selection, or is there going to be a shaded fuel break? All of that is going to be under silviculture. So this is how you can understand roughly what is going to occur within a proposed timber harvest plan. You can also find out how they're going to yard the THP by going to item number 16. So yarding is how you get the THP from where it's felled to a lumber deck, where they start to stack the logs to be taken out of the forest. So things that are more impactful would be ground-based yarding, right? So that is where you might have a heavy machinery that drags the tree from where it was felled to the timber deck. And that's going to be impactful because you're creating more of a disturbance. It's going to allow for more sediment impacts. You're going to potentially create a channel for gulling and erosion. You can get also understanding of how it's going to impact erosion by going to 17, item number 17. You can find out if they're going to be operating in winter, which is a more impactful way of logging by going to number 23. You'll find out about roads or landing construction in item 24. If they're going to harvest within a watercourse protection zone, that's item 26. These are all things that are useful to understand in section 2. And this is all stuff that you should be taking into consideration in trying to view whether or not this is a timber harvest plan that is going to be impactful and maybe one that you'd like to fight. All right, so let's look at an example of a THP. So here we're looking at 120-104 Humboldt. So this is the 104th THP in the Coast Range in the year 2020 in Humboldt. So here we are on item 14, silviculture. We can see that this is a primarily clear cutting based THP. So 96.5 acres of clear cutting. Clear cutting, even age management is going to be inherently more impactful than other forms of management, such as uneven age management. They are also doing some amount of uneven age management with selection logging. And they also will have some special prescriptions. So it might be that they're going to try to do some oak woodland management or something else. Going to 16, we can see that they are almost giving themselves all options for how they're going to yard. And this is not surprising. This is something you see in a lot of THPs where they'll preserve their options going forward. So again, looking at this THP, they're going to use tractor logging or yarding. So they could potentially just drag a tree along. they also might use a feller buncher. A feller buncher um, is less impactful, but it's still heavy machinery out on the ground. Cable yarding, you can have various different types of cable yarding. Cable yarding is perhaps less impactful than ground-based yarding. And then you have some that are rarely used. Helicopter yarding is basically only used in areas that are either extremely steep and can't be accessed well by other types of yarding, or they're trying to pull out individual trees from a larger unit. So that might suggest that those trees that they're going to pull out are going to be larger. I've never seen animal yarding be checked, although I know in Vermont that folks still use work oxen to pull trees. Roads, again, or excuse me, maps. This is going to be at the end of section 2. So this is your first look on the ground. CAL FIRE, they're a bunch of jerks. They will get oftentimes maps that are submitted to them in color, and they will scan them in black and white. So oftentimes maps are extremely unuseful, and you'll have to go and ask CAL FIRE to do a better scan for you, or to send you a photocopy of the original map in color. But maps are totally important for our use, right? This is where we see where they're actually going to propose their logging. So here on this map, this is a green diamond THP. We can see roads that they're going to use within the THP. We can see their logging areas, which are light gray colors. We can also see some creeks, so you can see relatively the placement of these THP areas near water courses. So all useful things. We also have, it looks like marble murrelet habitat potentially nearby in this THP. Looks like we might have osprey as well. These are all things that will be useful for you when reviewing and commenting on a THP. So you'll have an overview map as well. So this is all the different units within a THP. So here it looks like they have at least A, B, C, D, E, F. They have 6 units, and then you can see individual unit maps. So one is at a more landscape scale, and one is at a more fine resolution scale. The finer resolution scale, you can start to see better how an individual unit might impact the larger area. Something else that I always find useful is item 32. So these are this is the first discussion of what species might be impacted. So are there any rare, threatened, or endangered species present within the THP area? And they're going to tell you here, and you're going to have to look elsewhere for more information about these THPs, or excuse me, these species. All right. As I said, sections 2 and section 4 are the most useful in my view. Section 4 is where we get into cumulative impact analysis. So I think Chris had a question earlier in the chat about technical rule addendum regarding cumulative impact analysis. So Chris asked, is technical rule addendum number 2 regarding cumulative impacts just advisory, or is it regulatory, or is it a regulation that you have to have CAL FIRE, that you can have CAL FIRE have to use and be regulated by? Technical rule addendum number 2 was never formally passed as a rule by the Board of Forestry. It exists in this weird place, and it might be subject to challenge as a result. Technical rule addendum is number 2 is what largely governs section 4. It is the description by CAL FIRE, by the Board of Forestry, how somebody can go about doing cumulative impact analysis. It is not the only way that one can do cumulative impact analysis, but it is the recommendations by the agency how to comply with CEQA. So as we said before, a THP is a functionally equivalent document. That means, among other things, that the agency is going to have to look at potential cumulative impacts of this THP. So a cumulative impact is the direct impacts of this THP together with the direct impacts of other projects within the area. So you might have multiple THPs that have been proposed in the same larger planning watershed. And, you know, if you have multiple THPs, you will, you might have an individual THP might not have a significant effect on the environment, but if you have, you know, 10 THPs and they're all proposing clear cuts and they're all near water courses and steep slopes and whatever, then you might start to see that together these projects cumulatively are going to have that significant impact. All right. So within cumulative impact analysis, some things that you can look for is the guess by the RPF on whether particular areas might be a problem. So here you can see that they don't think that anything will have a significant adverse cumulative effect after mitigation, but the RPF does note that it is only after mitigation. So so I'm going to carefully look then at the watershed impacts and the biological impacts in this THP. That's how I'm going to read section 4. Those areas are going to stand out inherently to me as potentially useful for greater scrutiny. And here are all the various areas that that they're going to examine cumulative impact. So you have watersheds, soil productivity, biological resources. So this includes things like endangered species, but it also could include species that are rare. So something that is a species of special conservation concern, or it may not be formally listed as rare under any sort of government document, but it might still be an important species that could be impacted by the THP. So if the THP might impact deer, for example, that would be discussed in the biological resources section. We have recreation. Recreation is often not one that you're going to see because private timber companies often don't let people onto their land, because once they do, it can make it you know, people start to develop an interest in their land. And so then if the timber company were to close it for timber harvesting, then they might have a significant impact. Visual impacts, traffic. So if you were to have a THP that was going to result in a large number of truck trips on a road that the community uses, this might be a potentially significant impact. We've seen this in a THP that was proposed actually at a golf course of all places in Humboldt County. And it was using a road that that there was an elementary school at the end of the road. And so locals were concerned about the trucks potentially barreling down this road too quickly, given that there are going to be kids on it. Per California law, they have to examine greenhouse gas emissions. This is an area that I think a lot of us want to inherently attack because, you know, they're removing the carbon sequestration potential of a forest, and they're resulting in direct emissions. So far, there have been no successful THP lawsuits that have attacked the greenhouse gas analysis. It doesn't mean that it won't occur in the future, but just as a word of warning, don't get too hung up on greenhouse gas analysis. And then wildfire risk and hazard. Chris asks, has Epic ever litigated using a challenge to the analysis submitted for visual impacts? If we have, it would have been way before my time, so maybe in the 1990s. Visual impacts is also an area that it is probably going to be more difficult to challenge, and you're probably going to have some sort of rare and unique resource that would be impacted. So, for example, I'm thinking of Strawberry Rock outside of Trinidad, California, which is a popular hiking spot that you have to cross Green Diamond Resource Company land. Strawberry Rock gives you a nice viewpoint for the coast and for a lot of the coastal redwood forests of that area. That is so unique and so rare that maybe that is where you would start to see visual impacts being a potential problem. I don't know if a scenic road could be an issue, although if it's designated by the state as scenic, then that is an arrow in your quiver. So in response to Chris in the chat. So you are concerned about THP, you want to engage. Let's talk about engagement. Let's talk about how we can try to impact a THP, either make it better or try to kill it. So a lot of folks want to immediately jump to challenging a timber harvest plan. Let me back up and just say that oftentimes this is the most extreme recourse and it's the most difficult. So if you can live with the timber harvest plan with some sort of reasonable modifications, I would say that that is your easiest option, and that's where you should try to turn first. And that is often just a negotiated settlement with the RPF, with the timberland owner. You can often get changes to a timber harvest plan made by talking to the RPF and being nice. So again, back to the example of the THP on a golf course and the trucks going down the road by the elementary school. The neighbors in that area were able to get a promise from the trucking company not to run trucks when kids might be present, and got a promise to also not begin operations until after 7 a.m. In some areas, you might have THPs starting as early as the sun comes up, or perhaps even before the sun comes up. This is often an area that if you live nearby, you might just want to try to talk to the RPF to see if you can get some sort of an amendment to the THP. If you want to challenge a THP, you're going to need to show an abuse of discretion. And so there are kind of two ways that you can do this. So one is a process violation. And process violations are the cleanest and easiest for a court to deal with, right? So this is if a RPF did not, or CAL FIRE did not provide a sufficient comment period as required by law, or if they didn't respond to comments in the THP, or had some other sort of a goof where there is a clear rule and you can show a clear violation of that rule. You can also show an abuse of discretion if CAL FIRE were to approve a THP and the foundations of their arguments are not based on substantial evidence. So if the agency were to approve a THP and were to say that that there were no impacts to endangered species, but they failed to do the requisite surveys to find out whether or not species use the area, that would be a form of an abuse of discretion. They're not using substantial evidence. The RPF's guess on whether or not species are present is not substantial evidence in this case. So our job is to try to, if we're going to try to challenge a THP, and this is really in particular talking about non-process violations, these substantive violations, is that we're going to try to have to show that they did not rely on substantial evidence. So we are going to need to submit our own evidence into the administrative record. Chris asks if they just check a box with no analysis, is that an abuse? That is an abuse. That is not something that should be able to stand in a THP. If there's no analysis at all, then there is no substantial evidence, right? So they can't claim to do cumulative impacts analysis if there's just nothingness. So substantial evidence. We are going to try to get things into the administrative record and I'll talk about what an administrative record is in a sec, to show that either the RPF and CAL FIRE didn't consider a potential impact or that their analysis was flawed in some way. So we're going to want to get in stuff like facts. So this is where we often do a poor job of THP comments. Oftentimes people will just put in their comment that says that they are opposed to a THP and CAL FIRE shouldn't approve. That isn't sufficient. That is not substantial evidence. We're going to want to submit things like, that there was an NSO survey from a previous THP that you found by doing some good sleuthing, and that that NSO, the Northern Spotted Owl survey, was not included in this THP. So if they've missed something substantial like that, that is great evidence that you should bring forward to CAL FIRE. And that would be an example of something that would be substantial evidence that would undercut their potential analysis on biological resources. Another thing that is great, if you can afford it, is expert opinion. So although we're all smart people and we can read documents well and we can do good research ourselves, unfortunately, the American legal system gives more weight to somebody who has some letters after their name. So if you can find somebody to review the THP and to submit comments on that THP on your behalf, that is fantastic, and that's going to go a lot further. So, for example, on a recent THP that we're working on, we hired a Northern Spotted Owl biologist to review all of the survey information that was included in the THP. And she found that they just did not survey to protocol, that their surveys were insufficient and could result in missing Northern Spotted Owls on the landscape. So we are going to submit all of that together with our THP comments. And, if CAL FIRE doesn't respond adequately, if the RPF doesn't adequately respond, that could be a potential claim in a future lawsuit. So we need to get substantial evidence in. I want to get down here. No, actually, I'll go back. So we're going to get into the administrative record. The administrative record is all of the stuff that is in the THP file. It's all the stuff that CAL FIRE will have considered in whether or not to approve this THP. That is what is important for us. If there is something that you didn't send into CAL FIRE, but you thought that they probably should have known, that will not be grounds for a lawsuit. You need to give it to CAL FIRE. And so we'll talk about how we can best make sure that all the information that would form the potential grounds for a lawsuit is in your comments in a little bit. Skipping this, skipping all that. All right, I'm gonna get down to comment content. So something else that is strangely important is being taken seriously. So presenting your arguments in a way to be taken seriously. So it is formulating your arguments in a way that a court would recognize later as basically just looking like a good thing that they should pay attention to, that this person is not just a quack, that they have done a good thorough review. So this is my general comment letter structure that I think works for a good comment letter. So you want to open by introducing yourself. So if you are submitting comments on behalf of a group, identify that group that you are submitting comments on. You want to summarize what you think are the general problems, so that if somebody only reads the very beginning of your letter, they'll get an idea of what is at issue. You then want to break up all of your potential issues into separate, discrete areas. So at least having a paragraph of difference for each issue. Better yet, you can have subheadings that have an argumentative header that that break up all of the potential issues that you've identified in the timber harvest plan. So if you're talking about endangered species, you might say, you'll have a subheader that will say, the THP failed to consider survey information for marble murrelets. And then underneath that subheader, you will outline how the agents or how the RPF failed to do this thing that was necessary for them to do to have a good, well-supported argument. And so you'll do this throughout. So all of your different issue areas, go through and clearly define what is wrong. So then at the end, we'll summarize again your arguments. You'll make an ask. Your ask is generally be that CAL FIRE not accept the THP for approval and instead reject or send back to the RPF. And I often ask for future updates on projects. It's not something that you will often get. Somebody once asked, what if in the chat function, what if there are post-project mitigation measures like a wildlife survey that they say that they're going to do in the THP. You can ask for those things to be forwarded to you. No guarantee that it will be. But that is to say, all of that stuff should eventually get into the THP folder. So if they do post approval surveys or anything else, any documents that come in after the fact, all of that should eventually get into that same THP folder on Caltrees. All right, skipping this. All right, so we need to exhaust our administrative remedies. If you don't comment, if you don't raise the issue, you can't litigate later. So it is on us to comment. That is our job as the public. Unfortunately, I think that we are given a pretty poor role in the forest practice rules. The structure is generally set up as some sort of an iterative structure so that agencies will have their comments taken more seriously, and that the RPF will revise the THP in response to agency comments. It doesn't seem like the structure is well set up for the public to have their opinions, their thoughts meaningfully addressed in the THP structure. So we're often left to litigation as our last recourse. And so we need to make sure that we leave no stone unturned. So you need to make sure that you get your facts in. You need to make sure that you get your studies in. Anything that you want before the agency, it is on you to put it in there. So if there are any documents, for example, referenced in your comment letter, include those. And this is something that is entirely irritating, but it is something that will have you taken more seriously by the agency. You can't just cite to a study, for example. So let's say that we're talking about sediment impacts, and we cite to some study from Leslie Reed out of the Pacific Science Research Station out of Arcata about sediment production from clear cutting within a particular soil type. You will need to submit a PDF or some version of that study that you reference to CAL FIRE. If you don't, CAL FIRE does not believe that they have they don't believe that they're mandated to go out and find whatever you cite. So if you're going to bring this up to a judge in the future, you're going to want to make sure that that is clearly in the record so that you can cite to it. You can cite to that specific study, even to the page of that study that you are talking about. It is incredibly important, and I feels like I'm beating a dead horse here, but it is one of the most useful things, and this is something where I see a lot of people failing to do it right. For THPs on the North Coast, we submit our comments to the Santa Rosa Public Comment website or to the email address. So it is here. Each area of the state has its own lead office for THP comments. So if you're in the Sierras, it might be different. I only comment on THPs in the North Coast region, so I only ever send my comment letters to the Santa Rosa Public Comment email address. But all of that should be available within the THP file itself, and then also on CAL FIRE's website on where to send your comments. There are some great resources available. So CalTrees, again, this is where you're going to find all of your THP information and other documents as well that could be useful for you, such as portions of their sustained yield plan or their option A, or some of these other larger scale planning documents that often get submitted to CAL FIRE. The California Watershed Mapper, again, this is run by CAL FIRE. This is a really great tool for you to look at to understand the history of the area that you're working in. So you'll be able to see THPs back into the 1980s on the Cal Watershed Mapper website. It has, you can zoom into individual watersheds. This is where you can find that watershed number that we were talking about earlier. It's a really useful mapping tool. There are other databases. The California Native Diversity Database costs you money, but it will have survey information from past THPs, and it can be a useful site to confirm some of the information in a THP. Chris asks, does the Watershed Mapper have LiDAR data? Not to my knowledge. You can find LiDAR from other areas. California Geological Survey might have it, or USGS might have LiDAR data for your area. LiDAR, if you're not aware, is a form of mapping data whereby a plane flies over an area and shoots a laser, and the reflection of the laser and the amount of time for that to come back to the plane gives data about how far away an object is to the ground. And so you can get a lot of really cool information from LiDAR, including past landslides, tree height, channels that could be an unmarked stream, or it may be an ephemeral stream. All that can be done on LiDAR. Not all areas have LiDAR information, and not all of those areas are available. There are other great websites too that you can check out. Google Maps is really fantastic to just see the long-term changes in the landscape area. You can see in real time kind of the pock marks of THPs by using their time tool. So you can go back in time and look at aerial photographs of an area from the 1980s and go forward for every year that they have new data for that region. It's a really cool and great tool that you can use as well. So tons of resources online. You'll discover your own and share them with me if you have some good ones. And so we'll get to questions now. Let's see here. I know that there are a number of questions in the chat. I'll go through questions in the chat first, and we have about a half hour for questions. And then after we get through questions in the chat, then we will open up the floor for more. So who does THP inspections? So there are the pre-harvest inspections. And so that is a CAL FIRE review team member will go out on the ground on the THP inspection for the PHI, as well as potentially other agencies. So you'll often find somebody there from the California Geological Survey or from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Oftentimes they'll write up a report about what they've seen on their inspections. This can be useful information for you to mine. All of these documents will eventually be in the THP file. So if, for example, CDFW identifies some things based on their pre-harvest inspection that that stood out to them, pay close attention. You know, if they're saying that these are trees that have big, heavy, decadent branching that could support marble murrelets, that should trigger in you a desire to go look for how they discuss potential impacts to marble murrelets. Christopher asks, how should we go about searching or monitoring a particular area? Are there any areas we should focus on in particular? Wouldn't it make sense for us to collectively comment on specific THPs? Yes. So I think that this is a topic for broader discussion at EPIC and at the Stop Clear Cutting California campaign. You know, this is getting into strategy about probably how are we going to change the forest practice rules? How are we going to use litigation or public commenting as a way to get changes on the ground? So I think that we can maybe have a longer discussion about this at the next meeting, but I think that that one thing that would be good for us as a forest protection movement to do would be to identify those areas that we think the forest practice rules are not serving the public interest and try to find THPs that would serve as a good test case to challenge the forest practice rules as insufficient. So, for example, if there was something concerning greenhouse gas emissions, you know, I said previously that this has not been a winner for us, but this has been an area that has been targeted. And this is where a lot of effort has gone in to try to come up with a campaign to get better greenhouse gas emission analysis within timber harvest plans. So yes, it's great. The more that you can collectively comment on a specific THP, the more that CAL FIRE will take comments seriously, and the more potential eyes on that THP can spot different issues. So, you know, in your review of a THP, you're not going to get everything, right? You can do this for 20 years, you'll still miss things. That's why it is wonderful if you can have a team of folks and to team up on individual THPs. It's going to feel random, and it is going to be a bit random which THPs you'll probably want to end up teaming up on, but I think it's a great strategy.
If you want me to move, I'll move. If you're ready for me to move.
So as a reminder to make sure to have your mic muted, do comments make a difference? This is kind of the $1 million question, right? Comments by themselves often don't make a ton of difference. CAL FIRE is industry captured, to use the terminology. There's a revolving door between the timber industry and CAL FIRE, where RPFs will go to CAL FIRE from the timber industry and then go back to the timber industry. It is largely set up in my view, to defend the RPF from challenge. So CAL FIRE does not view its job as trying to, well, so this is again all my opinion. CAL FIRE does not view its job as trying to ensure that
Close the,
that there aren't going to be significant impacts from a timber harvest plan. It's trying to protect that RPF, protect the timber industry from challenge. And this is part of the problem. Comments do make a difference, and comments are necessary for us to potentially litigate on projects. And this is where we get back to the need to collectively strategize and to target individual THPs. Unless some of us are rich, you know, we're not going to be able to challenge a THP by ourselves. It's going to cost us a good deal of money, $40,000 or so plus, to challenge a THP, because we're going to have to go out and we're going to have to hire attorneys. Most public interest environmental law groups like Earth Justice won't touch timber harvest plans because they're more focused on other areas. They're focused on public lands. They're focused on endangered species. The large scale public interest environmental law movement has given up on timber harvest plan review. So it is on scrappy activists like us to try to reform THPs. So comments do make a difference, but you'll often feel like you're banging your head against the wall. And it is a frustrating feeling. So it can lead to burnout. So this is a warning to everybody there that, that, you know, you can do this work for a while and then you might not see much progress. So Chris asks, the fact that THPs are functionally equivalent as set up, how can this be legally used by CAL FIRE to skirt strict adherence to full CEQA? So this is a decision by the Resources Agency that THPs contain a sufficient amount of analysis that they are more or less that sort of hard look review required by a CEQA environmental impact statement. So it is a decision by the state that, you know, we're not going to try to make somebody go through two different processes to get their logging approved. It's something that we probably can't challenge at this moment. Maybe we'll be able to challenge it in the future, but it's just the way it is. One of the good things is that because they are functionally equivalent, we can bring in CEQA case law to the cumulative impacts analysis area of THP. So if they do a poor job on cumulative impact analysis, you can point to those cases from the much better developed CEQA case law as examples that the RPF and CAL FIRE have violated the law. Everything is in the file for the THP on CalTrees. CalTrees will have everything that is supposedly before them. So this isn't a question. Is every communication generated in this THP filing and review posted on CalTrees? In theory, yes. If for some reason there's something that was not posted on CalTrees, I think that you could probably litigate that as some sort of a substantive failure in the THP process. But I haven't had that experience that something has not been posted to CalTrees. CAL FIRE is pretty good at updating the website. Is CAL FIRE the beneficiary of the THP? And are they also the agency that approves THPs? Is there any check on the agency to approve their own plans? In some areas, like the Jackson Demonstration State Forest, CAL FIRE is the agency that both owns the land, submits the THP, and reviews and approves it. Supposedly, there are internal firewalls within CAL FIRE to prevent some sort of malfeasance between these different branches of that same agency, but it is the same agency that does all of those things in some circumstances. So my guess is that This is a question from one of our friends who joined us from the Mendocino Trail Stewards, who are working on THPs on the Jackson Demonstration State Forest. All the research is document based only. You're not allowed on private lands. Yeah, generally you're not allowed on private lands. There are things that you can do though if there is a THP in your area that you would like to kind of check out, right? You can always stand on the edge of that private land and look in. That's not violative. If there is a navigable waterway, it is your right to go up that navigable waterway, and you can get into a THP through that way. It is kind of it's kind of weird to do that, but you can. Some timber companies try to take an approach with the public of allowing access to their lands. So if you were to discover issues in an area because you were allowed to go there to go mushrooming, that is something that, as long as you have permission, you can bring up that in your THP review. There is a strain of direct activism in the private forestry reform movement that doesn't necessarily respect private property boundaries. And they go onto their own land, or they go onto the private property, and they announce their findings, and that is fine. You can use someone else's trespassing and public documentation of this to do your own sort of research. But I wouldn't necessarily suggest you going yourself and then trying to use that information that you gleaned from trespassing in your comments. So let's see here. Going through the rest of the questions. There is a question about marking for cutting. This is something that if you can get access to the area can be useful. Again, you might be able to ask to see a THP area, and you can see how they lay out their selection. This is particularly useful for something like group selection or single tree selection, where really how they select the trees matters in terms of their potential impacts. Are they taking the small trees? Is this thinning of an area that was not too long ago replanted, and so they're trying to release the remaining trees? Is it not going to be that impactful, or are they going in and are they going to high grade? So trying to see the mark is very important. A question about next week's presentation. It will be on Wednesday at the same time. Can THPs be good for the land? Yeah, absolutely. Just like that last example, there are many areas that have been overstocked and are plantations, right? So they have interlocking crowns, way too densely planted. Removing trees could be a benefit for that area because you're going to release the remaining trees. They're going to be able to better compete. They're going to put on more biomass faster. That's not necessarily a problem. It will likely reduce fire risk. There's also THPs that aren't necessarily that bad, right? Not all logging is necessarily bad logging. We all use timber products in our everyday lives. To some degree, this is a necessary evil. And so trying to separate out what are those high priority THPs, again, is important. And so we can use some of the cues and clues from timber harvest plans to figure out whether or not this timber harvest plan is going to be good or bad. So are they using even age management or uneven age management? That is one rough metric that you can use to judge whether or not this is going to be impactful. Are they logging in riparian areas? Are they logging in winter? Do they respect winter restrictions? Are there endangered species present? All of these are going to be things that we can and should use to triage our comments to try to figure out what are those THPs that really demand the most attention. And insofar as we form a collective unit, right? If you're a member of Stop Clear Cutting California, this is how that organization could prioritize what THPs it uses or it wants to try to work on. Or if you're a member of Mendocino Trail Stewards, this is how you can look and tell the difference between, Casper 500 and Little North Fork or whatever it is. Jeff Stone says all documents on Caltrees are scanned as images, which makes them impossible to search. Do they do that just to make us crazy? Yes, I'm pretty sure that they do. So CAL FIRE is an agency that is loath to change as well. And they everything was once paper-based and they are moving online. I think that Caltrees is actually a worse system than their previous THP library, but they think it's an improvement. I think that they could have all documents submitted to them as searchable PDFs and just submit those searchable PDFs to the website, but they don't. What they'll often do is they'll take physical copies of THPs and they'll run them through the scanner and they'll put those documents online. What you can do is you can make these scanned PDFs searchable. This is one thing that you can do through Adobe Acrobat Pro, I believe, or there are free websites that you can do this as well. And you can make a document searchable. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that part of the reason that CAL FIRE does it is just to frustrate the THP review process. Again, CAL FIRE institutionally, I don't think that they particularly want public participation. If their goal is not officially, but de facto to insulate the timber industry from challenge, it is useful to them to, submit full color maps in black and white, or to make document review as difficult as possible. Are challenges to THPs more successful if the THP is near towns, such as in a WUI, wildlife urban interface? THPs leading to increased risk of fire, affect water of a town. I don't necessarily know if it makes a THP challenge more successful. I think that proximity to human settlement often is one of those things that gets people engaged in THP review. And this is something that, we're often trying to meet people where they are. My least favorite timber company is Green Diamond Resource Company. It would probably be SPI if I lived somewhere else in the state, but Green Diamond is the worst large scale timber company in Humboldt County where I live. But Green Diamond largely is not taken on by folks because they have large blocks of uninterrupted timberlands that are far away from human settlements or are screened and blocked by beauty strips. So you can't see what's going on and their destruction behind these beauty strips. So oftentimes there are people who are fired up and excited to take on a THP, and it might not be the worst THP. This is something that's going on with a THP that we're working on. It is meeting people where they are and trying to get people involved and engaged in timber harvest plan review, I think is always just generally a good thing. Maybe they'll catch a bug and they'll continue to do this. Increasing risk of wildfire. This is something that I think should be an area where we focus resources as an environmental movement. Plantations post clear cut are really bad, or if you don't clean up your slash well after logging, this can increase fuel risk, particularly fine fuels, which burn really, they kind of flash burn, they burn really hot and fast. So yeah, that's absolutely something that we can and should take on. I'm not sure if it's led to THP challenges being more successful or not. And affecting the water of a town, I wonder if you are referring to the town of Weed, California, who has been fighting with the timber company over their water supply. Um, we have laws specifically regulating clean water for towns. I think it's the Safe Drinking Water Act or Clean Drinking Water Act. It's California state law. I I am not aware of it being utilized, but it's possible. Um, Jennifer asks thoughts about how to take on the timber industry more directly. I think that this is something that we can take on a little bit better uh, in next week's talk. But I think that we've hit on a number of themes tonight. One is trying to um, collectively work on fewer THPs. So trying to identify which of those THPs are the worst, and then swarming to those and working as a cohesive unit to try to challenge THPs. We've also historically, as a forest protection movement, haven't gotten the most benefit out of timber harvest plan review. It has been other laws that have really stopped logging most effectively, right? So timber harvest plans, the process is largely set up to insulate the timber industry, so it's difficult. The Federal Endangered Species Act, for example, though, that is what stopped the Palco liquidation logging of the redwoods in the 1990s. It was the marble murrelet. So other laws are often a better way to take on a timber harvest plan or proposed logging. So we'll talk about those other laws later. Could the Board of Forestry pressure CAL FIRE to make the THP process more friendly to the public? Yes, but again, the Board of Forestry is just like CAL FIRE. It was deliberately set up by the legislature to not be friendly to the public. So it is still largely dominated by timber interests. So I don't think that the Board of Forestry is our friend any more than CAL FIRE is our friend, which is to say that they're both our enemies here. So any other questions? I think that we've run through quite a bit. Again, all this will be published online. Eventually, I hope to turn this into a small how-to manual as well. Basically, if I was okay, question about a new department to deal with wildfires at San Jose State University. By any chance, would they be looking at things like this? So universities would probably not be engaged in the THP process. They would probably be looking at research plots, but it's possible. In large part, the California state system, the CSU system, churns out forestry majors that then go into timber companies to write these sort of documents. I don't think that the CSU system or the UC system is particularly interested in trying to upset CAL FIRE or upturn the apple cart here. So I feel like I should do a brief summary of kind of the broad scale stuff from tonight. So again, use CalTrees to find your THPs. Once you're getting into the THPs, I think that section 4 of the THP is the most useful spot. It is trying to take on the qualitative analysis that is in section 4. That is where we as a public will do best. it's finding science that contradicts the agency and putting it into the record by submitting it into your public comment. It is trying to find inconsistencies within the THP. Those are the types of things that will be useful. Perhaps this might be our last question from Jennifer. Can Epic put out alerts to what THPs are worth fighting? Yeah, we can and we will. Epic thankfully just hired another attorney on staff in October. And so Matt is fully engaged in THP review right now. We're working on a number of THPs on the Jackson Demonstration State Forest with our friends from the Mendocino Trail Stewards and the local Audubon chapter and so forth. So check out our action alert there and put in a comment on the on Mitchell Creek THP and Little North Fork THPs, both of which are open. Also sign up for emails from Stop Clear Cutting California. They also have a great group of activists that are engaged on THP review. All right, Chris, I will tackle your question about the divorce of CAL FIRE in our next presentation. So until then, I hope that tonight was a useful use of your time, and I really appreciate all of you turning out for the presentation. My name, again, Tom Wheeler. You can find me at tom@wildcalifornia.org. So feel free to shoot me an email. And I am a pretty busy dude, so it might take me some time to get back to you. And if I don't respond to you, ping me again, and I will try to get back to you as fast as I can. So thanks, y'all. I hope you have a great night, and I'll talk to you soon. Yeah, and I'll put my email address in the chat.
Thanks, Tom.
Oops, that was just a Karen. Yeah, have a great night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you.
Guys still talking. Yeah.